Are you lying awake at night, wondering if everyone else your age has their financial life together while you're still figuring out how to make your paycheck last until the next one? Maybe you're scrolling through social media, seeing people your age buying houses, taking amazing vacations, or talking about their retirement plans, and you can't help but wonder how they're managing to save anything at all. Well, today I'm going to pull back the curtain on what Americans are actually saving at every stage of life, and I guarantee some of these numbers are going to shock you. Some might make you feel surprisingly good about where you stand, while others might serve as a serious wake-up call that it's time to get your savings game together. My name is Nick, and I help people understand money, personal finance, and building wealth without all the confusing jargon that makes your eyes glaze over. If you're interested in finally getting a clear picture of where you should be financially and maybe even getting ahead of your peers, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if this information helps you out. Before we dive into these eye-opening numbers, let me ask you something. When you think about the average person your age and their savings, what comes to mind? Do you picture someone who has their act together, steadily building wealth with a clear plan for the future? Or do you imagine someone who's basically winging it, hoping everything works out while secretly panicking about money? The truth is, most of us have absolutely no idea what normal actually looks like when it comes to savings at different ages. We might have assumptions based on what we see around us, but the reality is often very different from what we imagine. Here's what makes this whole topic so fascinating and, frankly, a little bit scary. Understanding these benchmarks isn't just about satisfying your curiosity or making yourself feel better or worse about your situation. It's about giving you the information you need to make informed decisions about your financial future. Think about it this way. If you're trying to get in shape, wouldn't you want to know what the average person your age weighs or how much they can bench press? If you're trying to improve your career, wouldn't you want to know what others in your field are earning? Money works exactly the same way. When you understand where you stand compared to everyone else, you can make smarter choices about your spending, saving, and investing. Now, here's where things get really interesting, and this might be the most important thing I tell you in this entire video. The financial industry has created these neat little benchmarks that supposedly tell you exactly how much you should have saved by each decade of your life. Fidelity Investments, one of the biggest names in retirement planning, suggests you should have saved 1 times your annual salary by age 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50, 8 times by 60, and 10 times by age 67. Sounds simple enough, right? Save 15% of your income starting at 25, invest wisely, and you'll hit these targets no problem. But here's what they don't tell you in those glossy brochures and financial planning seminars. These recommendations assume you start saving at 25 with a steady income, never lose a job, never have major medical expenses, never help family members financially, and never face any of the curveballs that life loves to throw at us. They also assume you're comfortable retiring at 67, which frankly sounds like a nightmare to a lot of people who want to enjoy their retirement while they're still young enough to actually do things. The reality is much messier and honestly much more interesting than these cookie cutter recommendations suggest. So let's break down what's actually happening in the real world decade by decade, starting with your 20s. Your 20s are supposed to be the time when you're young, broke, and figuring out life, right? Well, according to the experts, you should still be saving like your future depends on it because, spoiler alert, it absolutely does. The magic of compound interest means that every dollar you save in your 20s is worth significantly more than a dollar you save in your 40s or 50s. It's like planting a tree. The earlier you plant it, the bigger and stronger it grows over time. But let's be realistic about what 20-somethings are actually dealing with. You've got student loans that feel like a monthly mortgage payment, entry-level salaries that barely cover rent in most cities, and a culture that constantly tells you to live your best life and worry about money later. The average household led by someone between 25 and 34 earns about $85,000 a year after taxes. That might sound decent until you realize that's household income, meaning it could include a spouse or partner and it's after taxes, so the gross income is significantly higher. Now, using the 50-30-20 rule that financial experts love to throw around, you should be saving 20% of your income. For someone earning that average amount, that's about $17,000 per year, or roughly $1,400 per month. I don't know about you, but when I was in my 20s, finding $1,400 extra dollars every month felt about as realistic as finding a unicorn in my backyard. Here's what's actually happening with people in their 20s. Most are just trying to survive financially while building their careers. They're dealing with student loan payments, high rent costs, and the reality that entry-level jobs often don't pay enough to cover basic living expenses, let alone substantial savings. But here's the thing that might surprise you. Those who do manage to save even small amounts in their 20s are setting themselves up for massive advantages later in life. Consider this scenario. Sarah starts saving just $500 per month at age 25 and continues until she's 65. Assuming a 7% annual return, she'll have over $1.3 million at retirement. Meanwhile, if she waits until 35 to start saving and contributes $1,000 per month, she'll only have about $850,000. Starting earlier with less money beats starting later with more money every single time. But let's get real about the actual numbers. Recent data shows that people in their 20s who have retirement accounts typically have less than $15,000 saved. That's nowhere near the recommended one-time salary by 30, but it's also not nothing. The key insight here is that most 20-somethings who are saving anything at all are ahead of their peers, even if they're behind the theoretical benchmarks. The truth about your 20s is that it's less about hitting specific dollar amounts and more about building the habits that will serve you for the rest of your life. Learning to live below your means, automating your savings, and understanding basic investing principles are worth more than any specific dollar amount. If you can master these skills in your 20s, you'll be light years ahead of people who wait until their 40s to get serious about money. Moving into your 30s, this is where things get really complicated and honestly a bit overwhelming for most people. Your 30s are often when life hits you with its biggest financial challenges all at once. You might be thinking about buying a house, which requires a down payment that could easily be $50,000 or more. You might be starting a family, which comes with costs that can make your head spin. Childcare alone can cost more than many people's rent payments. Meanwhile, you're supposed to be saving 3 times your annual salary for retirement by age 40. For someone earning the average income of about $109,000 for people aged 35 to 44, that means having roughly $327,000 saved for retirement. When you're dealing with mortgage payments, daycare costs, and all the expenses that come with establishing your adult life, saving that much money can feel impossible. Here's where the gap between recommendations and reality becomes really stark. The average person in their 30s actually has about $200,000 in retirement savings, which sounds pretty good until you realize that's just for people who have retirement accounts at all. Plenty of people in their 30s are still building their emergency funds, paying off student loans, or dealing with other financial priorities that make retirement savings feel like a luxury they can't afford. What's really happening in your 30s is a financial juggling act that would impress circus performers. You're trying to balance immediate needs like housing and potentially childcare with long-term goals like retirement savings. You're dealing with career advancement that might require additional education or training costs. You might be helping aging parents while also thinking about your own children's future education expenses. The people who succeed financially during their 30s aren't necessarily the ones who hit every benchmark perfectly. They're the ones who stay consistent with their savings even when life gets expensive and complicated. They might not be saving 15% of their income every single month, but they're contributing something to their retirement accounts regularly, building their emergency funds gradually, and making conscious decisions about their major expenses. But here's something that might make you laugh or cry, depending on your perspective. The financial industry acts like your 30s should be this smooth, predictable decade where you just steadily accumulate wealth while checking off life milestones. Meanwhile, real people in their 30s are Googling things like, is it normal to panic about money at 3 in the morning? And how much house can I actually afford without eating ramen for the next decade? The reality is that your 30s are when you discover that being an adult is basically just saying, I can afford that, and then immediately wondering if you actually can. You're making more money than you did in your 20s, but somehow it feels like you have less of it. That's because your expenses have grown right along with your income, and often they've grown faster. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Meet Jennifer, a 34-year-old teacher earning $65,000 per year. According to the benchmark, she should have about $195,000 saved for retirement by age 40. Currently, she has $87,000 in her retirement accounts, which puts her behind the target, but ahead of many of her peers. Jennifer bought a modest house 3 years ago, putting down $20,000 that she had been saving since her mid-20s. She's got a $1,500 mortgage payment, contributes 8% to her retirement plan, and maintains a small emergency fund of about $8,000. Is Jennifer failing financially? According to the strict benchmark, she's behind. But in the real world, Jennifer is doing pretty well. She owns a home, she's consistently saving for retirement, and she's not drowning in debt. The gap between where she is and where the benchmarks say she should be isn't necessarily a crisis. It's just life happening while you're making other plans. Now let's move into the 40s, which is where things get really interesting and frankly a little bit terrifying for a lot of people. Your 40s are supposed to be your peak earning years, the time when you finally have your financial act together and you're cruising toward a comfortable retirement. The benchmark says you should have 6 times your annual salary saved by age 50. For someone earning the average income of about $116,000 for people in their 40s, that's nearly $700,000 in retirement savings. Here's where I'm going to share some numbers that might make you feel better or worse about your situation, depending on where you currently stand. The average person in their 40s has about $400,000 in retirement savings. That's a substantial amount of money by any measure, but it's still short of that 6 times salary target. What's more telling is that this average includes people with very high savings balances, which means plenty of people in their 40s have significantly less than $400,000 saved. Your 40s are often when reality sets in about retirement planning. You start doing the math and realizing that retirement isn't some distant concept anymore. It's something that could theoretically happen in 20 years, which sounds like a long time until you realize that 20 years passes faster than you think. This is when people start having what I call the holy crap moment about their savings. But here's what's actually happening during your 40s that makes this decade so financially complex. Many people are still paying mortgages on homes they bought in their 30s. They might school or college, have kids in high, which comes with expenses that can rival a small mortgage payment. College costs have exploded to the point where many families are choosing between funding their retirement and funding their children's education. It's like being asked to choose between your future self and your kids, which is an impossible choice for most parents. At the same time, your 40s are often when you start thinking about aging parents who might need financial help or care. You're potentially sandwiched between supporting your children and supporting your parents, all while trying to save for your own retirement. It's enough to make anyone want to hide under the covers and pretend money doesn't exist. Yet, despite all these competing priorities, something interesting happens to many people in their 40s. They start getting serious about money in a way they never have before. Maybe it's because retirement feels more real, or maybe it's because they finally reached income levels that make substantial savings possible. Whatever the reason, your 40s are often when people make their biggest strides in wealth building. The people who succeed financially in their 40s have usually figured out how to increase their income while keeping their expenses from growing proportionally. They might get promoted, change jobs for better pay, or develop additional income streams. They've learned that earning more money doesn't automatically solve financial problems if you just spend more money along with it. Moving into your 50s, this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of retirement planning. You're supposed to have 8 times your annual salary saved by age 60, and retirement is no longer some abstract concept. It's something that could happen in the next 10 to 15 years, which means your savings need to be substantial enough to support you for potentially 25 or 30 years without a paycheck. The average person in their 50s has over $600,000 saved for retirement, which actually puts them ahead of the benchmark for the first time in decades. This makes sense because your 50s are typically your highest earning years, and they're also when you get access to catch-up contributions that let you save more in retirement accounts than younger people can. But here's what's really happening in your 50s that makes this such a crucial decade. Many people are starting to think seriously about when they want to retire and what that retirement will look like. Some are discovering that they're on track for a comfortable retirement, while others are realizing they need to work longer than they planned or dramatically increase their savings rate. Your 50s are also when you start dealing with some harsh realities about aging. Health issues become more common and more expensive. You might start thinking about long-term care costs, which can easily run six figures per year. These aren't fun topics to think about, but they're essential for realistic retirement planning. The people who thrive financially in their 50s have usually developed what I call retirement clarity. They have a realistic understanding of what their retirement will cost when they want to retire, and whether their current savings trajectory will get them there. If there's a gap, they're taking action to close it, whether that means working a few more years, reducing their expected retirement expenses, or finding ways to dramatically increase their savings rate. Finally, let's talk about your 60s, which is when all those decades of financial decisions come together to determine what your retirement will actually look like. The benchmark says you should have 10 times your annual salary saved by age 67, but the reality is much more nuanced than any single number can capture. People in their 60s have average retirement savings of around $573,000, which is substantial, but might not be enough for the retirement lifestyle they envisioned. This is also the decade when Social Security becomes available, though the timing of when you claim it can significantly impact your lifetime benefits. What's really happening in your 60s is a complex calculation of health, wealth, and happiness. Some people discovered they love working and want to continue well past traditional retirement age. Others can't wait to stop working and are willing to live more modestly to make early retirement possible. Still others find they need to work longer than planned because their savings aren't sufficient for their desired lifestyle. The key insight about your 60s is that there's no single right answer about retirement timing or savings amounts. The right choice depends on your health, your savings, your family situation, and your personal preferences about how you want to spend your later years. Here's where things get really wild and honestly a bit depressing if you're not prepared for it. The gap between what the experts recommend and what people actually have saved becomes crystal clear when you look at the bigger picture. Remember those benchmarks I mentioned earlier? 1 times your salary by 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50? Well, it turns out that most Americans are failing these tests spectacularly, but not necessarily for the reasons you might think. Let's put this in perspective with some numbers that might make you feel better about your own situation, or alternatively, send you into a mild panic, depending on where you currently stand. The median retirement savings across all age groups for people who actually have retirement accounts is just $65,000. $65,000, that's not a typo. And remember, this only includes people who have retirement accounts at all, which means about 25% of Americans aren't even in this calculation because they have absolutely nothing saved for retirement. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that might actually give you hope if you're feeling behind. The people who are hitting or exceeding these benchmarks aren't necessarily earning massive salaries or inheriting money from rich relatives. They're usually just people who figured out a few key principles early and stuck with them consistently over time. So there you have it. The truth about savings by age isn't nearly as scary as those financial planning websites want you to believe, but it's also not as simple as just following some cookie-cutter formula. Whether you're crushing the benchmarks or feeling like you're way behind, remember that your financial journey is uniquely yours. The most important thing isn't where you are right now, it's what you do next.